Coming up on this episode of Crime Family.
This is part 2 of our Laci Peterson murder case deep dive. They found out that Scott would park along the shoreline just to watch them from the shore to see where they were searching.
Police got this potential new lead when someone reported that there was a burglary in the house right across the street from the Peterson home on Christmas Eve morning.
Hey, Happy New Year's.
Happy New Year.
I wanted to call you.
Thank you.
I'm near the Eiffel Tower. New Year's celebration is unreal.
And it's like everybody hates Scott, so they're not going to help him find Laci, but it's like Laci needs your help regardless of, what Scott did.
I just hope that sometime in the future you will let me tell you the whole story.
Dun dun dun!
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Crime Family. I'm your co-host, AJ, and I'm here with my two sisters, Stephanie and Katie. And this is part 2 of our Laci Peterson murder case deep dive. If you listened last week, we covered the initial disappearance of Laci and some of the circumstances surrounding that day, and also some of the suspicions surrounding her husband, Scott, who the police are very quickly zeroing in on and also crafting this narrative of what they think happened to Laci and all the suspicious things they believe Scott is doing. But we're going to just get right into part 2, a little bit more into the investigation as it unfolds. So friends of Laci in the early days after she first disappears, they recall Scott's behavior as being bizarre during the initial investigation as well. They explained to ABC News that Scott had a strict set of rules regarding the search and the media permissions that he would allow. So for example, he never allowed any photos of himself to be put on missing person posters. It could only have photos of Laci and not of them together. He also told them that he didn't want the media taking any photos or interviewing him or anything of that nature, or at least initially. And due to this, he always requested to leave the volunteer center before the media would be allowed in. And so of course, like the volunteer center was this huge kind of hub where all the volunteers would come and they would kind of map out where they're going to search. And it was just kind of a meeting place for all the volunteers who helped with the search. And so Scott would ask to leave, and then only once he left would the media be allowed to come in and interview all of them and take photos of them and stuff like that. So this is what the friends are saying. So in ABC's 2020, where they're covering this case, they do interview many of Laci's friends who were there during the early days of the investigation, and they're recalling these memories of how Scott was behaving. And they say that one of the walls of the volunteer center was just covered in photos of Laci. So these were candid photos, her friends and her family would come to the center and just put any photos they had with Laci or of Laci, they would put on this wall just as a memory of her, or just to keep them motivated that, she was the center of their search and on all of that stuff. So this wall was there, and Scott made sure that every photo that had him in it was taken off the wall, which they thought was weird. Therefore, he wasn't in any of the photos that were put up on this wall. And it's obviously a strange request from a husband of a missing woman, especially because he's so adamant about it. And then he does eventually do an interview sometime after Laci's disappearance. And Scott has a defense for his actions regarding this. And he says in this interview that he thought the media had a tendency to put emotional aspects of stories on the airwaves for maybe a few days, and then they'd move on to something else. So he says that by withdrawing from the media and not really giving them that emotional moment that they were seeking right away, that they would continue to come back to the story and continue to broadcast about it, seeking that ultimate emotional plea from him. So he explains that his attempt to avoid the media was just a strategic way to have the coverage of the disappearance continue longer to bring more exposure to the case. This is a weird explanation, I feel, even as someone who believes Scott is innocent, but I do think that's kind of a weird explanation to give. So I found that kind of odd.
I don't think it's weird at all, to be honest with you. I think he doesn't want, I think the reason why he doesn't, he says why he doesn't want his photos on there. But I think it's because he doesn't want the attention to go to him, and they want the attention to go focus more on Laci and find her and all that. So I think he just doesn't want his face to be published everywhere, so they can, like you said, so they can focus more on Laci and not more on him.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of go more into this as what I think is the ultimate goal for this was, but I'm not going to say anything about that yet because it kind of a spoiler alert for, the big thing we'll reveal later, which probably most people already know anyway. But yeah, I feel like it kind of makes sense, but it's also at the same time it is kind of sketchy. So I don't know really how I feel about that approach. But I mean, of course, people think him being camera shy is super suspicious, but if he was also loving the spotlight, then they think he'd be acting weird as well. And not even just loving the spotlight, but if he was very photogenic or in the camera, just all the time, then they wouldn't like that as well. They'd be like, oh, he's putting on this big act that he's this grieving husband. And when he's doing the opposite, they hate that as well. So it doesn't really matter, like we said, what he does. They're looking at him as the villain. And so they constantly said he was acting odd. He was acting aloof. He wasn't acting like he was grieving. And that wasn't sitting right with people. But I don't know. I feel that's just the kind of person that he was. And I can kind of relate to that. He didn't want to grieve out in the public. He was doing that privately, probably. He didn't want to show his emotions out there. More of a suffer in silence kind of person. But at the same time, I feel like it would be very hard to conceal your emotions if you were very distraught and scared if a family member was missing and possibly, in harm's way. And if you didn't have any idea where they were, I think it just would be hard to conceal those emotions. In at least one of the press conferences, you can see Laci's father. He's unable to hold in his emotions. He breaks and he starts crying and he's hunched over while on camera. But again, Scott could be letting all this out in private and just not letting himself break on camera. And also, he avoids the camera so much so that it's not like he was constantly in the spotlight directly. So maybe it was easier for him to hide those desperate emotions. I don't know. I tend not to get caught up with these reactions. It would be different if he was laughing and joking all the time, acting like he was having a great time, if he was going out to clubs and getting tattoos while his wife was missing. That would be very weird. But just the fact that he's quiet doesn't stand out to me as super odd. Nancy Grace, of course, chimes in a lot in this case. And one of the things that she says, of course, is that his demeanor just rubbed her the wrong way right from the get-go. You can just picture that in her voice.
Does she like anyone? I feel like every case it's just that person did it.
I was just going to say anybody rubs her the wrong way. Yeah, anybody rubs her the wrong way.
Well, she rubs me the wrong way, so.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, she's not on anyone's side. If your family member's missing, she hates you automatically. It doesn't matter who you are. And Laci's family was very supportive of Scott from the get-go, at least in the beginning. And they felt that he was not involved in her disappearance at all. Of course, he does do some things that will definitely put his character into question, which we'll get into in a bit. What's your guys' opinions on how he was acting? Do you think it's weird? Do you think, oh, that's just who he was? Was he putting on a show? What do you guys think?
Well, it's kind of like what you said, earlier in part one, where his family, he comes from a family who's very stoic, so they don't show a lot of emotion. So I don't think it's out of character for him to not show any type of emotion. And maybe they're the type of family that does it away from everybody. So to me, it doesn't seem like a red flag or suspicious anyway.
Yeah, that's always, it just kind of, I feel like because we cover so many cases, it does get repetitive after a while because it comes up in every case. Especially when it's the husband or the wife of someone, there's no right way to act in anyone's eyes. I would love someone who's actually had to go through that and had to do that to give more of an idea, because I have no idea how I would act in that situation or how anyone is supposed to act. There's no guide, there's no manual on how you're supposed to act when something like that happens, because nobody who's gone through that before knows how they would react until it happens. So I feel it's hard to analyze. Obviously, there's some things that make it suspicious, but
Well, Nancy Grace can tell you.
yeah, apparently she knows the ins and outs of how you're supposed to react in every moment. And obviously, I have my issues with Nancy Grace, as we even talked about even in the last case we did, because she was all over that one too. But I just don't know. I feel like nobody can really have an opinion. I mean, obviously, I guess about Nancy Grace again, like, I think she does have a past where she had experienced a lot of loss, and I think her husband was murdered and stuff like that. So, I mean, maybe she knows how someone reacts genuinely in that situation. So I guess maybe she has a right to say that, but...
Yeah, she knows how she reacts in that situation. Yeah. You can't predict someone else just because that's how you react.
Yeah. And she's also very simplistic, I feel. Like, if you're quiet, you're guilty. If you're alligator crocodile tears, or you're overly emotional, you're guilty. So it's very black and white to her. I feel like she doesn't really consider the nuances of like how someone might be feeling in that moment, or take into account who they are as a person. It's more like her judgment on how you should behave, even though she doesn't know the person. So I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I feel the same. Just like what Steph was saying, that I think that's just who he was as a person, and the way he was acting was completely normal for his normal demeanor. And it wasn't just like the local news that was trying to get a piece of Scott. Like, as we're talking about, this case kind of blows up in the media. It blew up very quickly, especially once the police started removing items from the Peterson home for further investigation. So among the items, there was 2 computers and 2 vehicles were removed and brought to the station, just so they could more closely examine these pieces for blood evidence, and the computers for just anything suspicious. And neighbors recall media and reporters being outside of the Peterson home 24/7. They were lined up down the street just wanting to get a glimpse of Scott or get any sort of response from anyone. And the media was obsessed with Scott, and the police were obsessed with finding evidence against Scott. And some sources say that because this was such a high-profile case and all eyes were on the police, the investigators in this case were really under pressure to hold someone accountable. And some speculate that that may have been why they had such alleged tunnel vision. If the whole world wasn't watching, they might have maybe taken more time to follow different leads. But because they were under such scrutiny and pressure, they wanted to kind of get this solved quickly, maybe, and just kind of pin it on somebody. And, with that being said, they had to check out why they thought Scott was really on his boat that day, because that was like the main thing they were saying. Why Scott was on his boat was to kind of, get rid of Laci. So that's a big thing that they honed in on.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to kind of get into like more of their theory of like when they believe Scott killed Laci and all of that sort of stuff. Police say in this ABC 2020 episode, the detectives are talking about how in the days following the disappearance, they believed that Laci was going to be found in the bay that Scott says he went fishing at on the day that she disappeared. So they do really begin to do extensive searches of this area. And they're even putting it out there in the media that like, we believe her body's going to be found here. Like, they're kind of really showcasing where they're searching and all that stuff. So everyone kind of knows where they're searching and what areas they're searching and all of that sort of stuff. The media's on it and people are aware of it every step of the way. And so they're doing extensive searches of this area. And while they're doing this, the detective, I believe it's Amber Frey, but it could be one of the other ones. I forget exactly who, but they talk about how they found out that Scott was apparently renting cars, and he would drive along the shoreline, or he would kind of park along the shoreline just to watch them from the shore, to see where they were searching and just to keep tabs on them, I guess. He's not checking in with them to see how things are going necessarily. He's not calling them and asking. He's just checking up on them on his own. And they become aware of this, that he's kind of watching them from the shore, which they think is also suspicious. Like, why does he care so much about exactly where we're searching? So that is also something the police mention as something that was super sketchy for them. But again, this is coming from their mouths, which we know that they have it behooves them to talk about all the ways in which Scott was sketchy. So I don't necessarily believe everything they say. I just take it as with a grain of salt, mostly.
Yeah, and also they were like, oh, Scott's not asking us what's going on. He's not involved at all. But then now he's kind of watching them to see what they're doing. Maybe he is interested to see what they find. And they're like, oh, why is he watching us and so interested in this? So it's like it really doesn't matter. He's interested. Oh, it's sketchy. He's not interested. Oh, that's super sketchy. So, I mean, just whatever he does, they're going to hate. So I don't know, you kind of feel bad for him in these situations because he really was the villain from the very beginning.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a scary thought to think all it takes is like in an instant, the police can decide who they want to pin a murder on. And from that moment on, it almost doesn't matter what you do because they're coming for you either way. So kind of a scary thought.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, they were convinced that they were going to find something in the San Francisco Bay. And according to the Murder of Laci Peterson docuseries, there was about 27 searches conducted in total in the Berkeley Marina. And they did believe that Scott was there on Christmas Eve, obviously, like he said, because he did have the receipts. And so they believed that he used that time out on the water to dump Laci's body in the San Francisco Bay. Even though police were now searching for a body and not Laci alive, her family was still hopeful at this point. They believed that she still could be out there just waiting to be found, and they were not convinced that Scott had anything to do with her disappearance at this point. Of course, police asked Scott if he knew where Laci was, and he said no. And they also asked him if him and Laci were having any problems in their marriage, and Scott said no, that everything was fine. And this, as we will get into, was a huge lie that blew up in Scott's face, and it just added fuel to the media firestorm.
Yeah, so as we've mentioned before, this case was a popular news story. It was everywhere pretty much from the very beginning, and it's being very highly publicized. So due to this, there was a lot of people coming forward with potential tips. And also, there was a lot of media coverage, both good and bad. Like, there were crazy conspiracy theories that were being thrown around in tabloid magazines. The National Enquirer was all over this case and saying that she was part of our satanic cult, or she was kidnapped, was part of this. Like, just ridiculous things that, you know, certain people love to speculate, and they eat that kind of stuff up. But so that just kind of goes to show you like how much was getting out there, and hard to decipher the truth from the lies. So it really muddies the water, and you have no idea really what to believe at a certain point. However, like Katie said, there were multiple people coming forward to say that they had spotted a pregnant woman walking her dog on Christmas Eve after the time that Scott says he went fishing that morning. So that means if he left already to go fishing and Laci is out walking her dog, then he couldn't have been the one to kill her if she went missing after that. So the police claim, of course, and they say in this ABC's 2020 that they actually discovered the identity of this pregnant woman who was walking her dog that day, and it wasn't Laci. So that meant that all these potential sightings of her could be explained. It didn't really do anything to lessen the suspicion on Scott. That's kind of what they chalk it up to. There was this other woman, Kristen, I believe her name is, that was also pregnant in the neighborhood. And they say that they were able to confirm that all these sightings were Kristen and not Laci, and that they looked similar, so people might have thought it was Laci. So because in their minds it was a different person, they didn't really believe or follow up on any of the leads. And I'll get to, I believe, in our last part, when I go into the back and forth, is he innocent? What's the deal? I go into detailed accounts of some of the eyewitnesses that are brought up in some of the research I've done, and it's riveting information that definitely makes you question whether it really was this other person that was the person that they saw, and makes you think it could be Laci for sure. So I'll get into that later, but just wanted to say that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because the private investigator that Scott's lawyer hired, named Ed Ermoine, he spoke out in this A&E docuseries that I've been talking about called The Murder of Laci Peterson. And he says that he spoke to multiple witnesses that remember seeing a pregnant woman walking, like you said, walking her dog that morning. And when all the sightings were mapped out on a map, it made not a perfect circle, but it made a circle around the neighborhood where Laci lived, and they estimated that it would take about 45 minutes to do that route. So it was like every witness, they kind of put like a dot on the map, and then if you like connect the dots, it was like the circle around where Laci could have walked, because it was like a circle around her neighborhood. And I guess none of them actually knew Laci personally, so they couldn't be for sure. They couldn't say for sure that, oh yeah, that was her. But all of these witnesses say that police nor investigators talked to them at all about what they saw that day, and no one followed up with them at all. So yeah, like you were saying, it's the police are saying, oh, it wasn't Laci, but if you look into it, it seems like maybe it could have been, because no one actually talked to them about it. So just super interesting, the both sides of this.
Yeah, and although, and I mentioned it in the last episode, the podcast Rabia and Ellen Solve the Case, they do mention that one of the witnesses, it's actually been confirmed, did know Laci personally. And this witness claims that she for sure saw Laci walking the dog, and it was her eyewitness account. It's kind of harder to ignore because this is a woman who knew Laci and knew what she looked like and knows it's her. She's not going to confuse Laci for someone else when you know her. It's easier to be that confident that it was Laci when you actually know her from before. So that's an interesting point, that there actually was a witness who did know her personally and says that it was her.
Yeah, that is super interesting. And there's even one witness who said that she saw a woman matching Laci's description walking a dog, and said there were two men that were following this woman and the dog started barking at them, and one of the men said to Laci, or said to this woman with the dog, shut that fucking dog up. So kind of aggressive men following this pregnant lady around the neighborhood, it seemed like. So on December 30th, police got this potential new lead when someone reported that there was a burglary in the house right across the street from the Peterson home on Christmas Eve morning. And there was reports that a suspicious vehicle, as well as suspicious people in front of the house around 11:40 that morning. So, of course, people drew an immediate connection to this burglary and Laci's disappearance. So people were speculating that maybe she witnessed the crime and saw the people committing the burglary. And, because of that, she would have been able to identify them. And they're saying that they grabbed her to prevent her from going to police. But it doesn't take long for the police to hone in on suspects of this burglary. And on January 3rd, the police announced that they have people in custody for that crime. And they said that they determined that the burglary actually happened on December 26th. So 2 days after Laci had gone missing. So they're saying it couldn't have been connected. The owners of the home that was being burglarized were out on holidays. And so they didn't know it had happened until they got home. So that's why they can't pinpoint the exact day. And they're saying that maybe witnesses that saw a strange vehicle may have mixed up the days, or maybe the vehicles that they saw actually had nothing to do with the robbery because they saw these vehicles on the 24th. However, like I mentioned earlier, there were reporters outside the Peterson house all hours of the night and day since Laci disappeared, and they were there on the night of the 26th as well. And one reporter named Ted Rollins, he even said that he was outside the Peterson house that morning in the early morning hours of the 26th, and he said there was no one in front of the house across the street. No one suspicious, and he said if there was any movement at all in that house, he would have been over there and tried to talk to them. But he said he saw no one at all. So it's kind of strange that the police are saying this burglary happened on the 26th, when legit there was the reporters standing outside the Peterson house, just watching everything that was going on. Once it's seemingly sorted out, even though they can't agree on the timeline of that robbery, the police are able to put their focus back on Scott again and Scott only. And so the world was already watching Scott's every move, but there were things that the police were keeping from the public, of course, so that they could further hone in on Scott and see how far he would go with some of the lies that they suspected that he had.
And it turned out that Scott did have a bunch of lies that he was keeping from everyone. But before I go into that, I actually just want to say, I don't believe at all that the police... Well, I believe that the police believe that the burglary happened on the 26th, but I don't at all believe that the burglary happened on the 26th, and I do believe it happened on Christmas Eve. And actually in the last part, there's a lot of evidence. So keep this burglary in mind because it does come up, and I'm going to talk about it specifically about the burglary and why I believe, that the police aren't reliable when they say it's the 26th. And there's also an eyewitness that comes forward that sees something really suspicious and also kind of maybe ties in to the burglary as well. So keep this burglary in mind because it's definitely going to come up later. But just for the sake of how we're telling this story, I'm going to move on to the next part, which is really important as well. But I just want to tell you to keep this burglary in mind because it's definitely not the last that you're going to hear about it. There was a vigil held in a local park shortly after Laci disappeared, and many of Laci's friends and family spoke to the crowd about her disappearance. But one person that was noticeably missing from taking that stage was Scott himself. He claims that the vigil was not a moment to take the spotlight, which he would have if he took that stage, presumably because he was under such suspicion at that time that he just didn't want to take the stage and take the focus away from Laci. So the candlelight vigil took place on New Year's Eve, only a week after Laci disappeared, and around the time of the vigil, instead of taking the stage to talk about her disappearance, he's on the phone with a woman named Amber Frey, who turns out to be his mistress. And he's telling her this fake story about being in Paris for New Year's Eve, and he's talking to her and says how he's near the Eiffel Tower and all of this stuff. So Amber actually records this phone call, and that's where Scott's telling her these details of how his New Year's Eve celebrations are going in Europe, and we're actually going to play part of that call for you now.
Hello? Amber!
Hi.
Amber! Amber!
I can hear you.
Amber, if you can hear me, it's New Year's.
I know. I can hear you.
Amber, it's New Year's here. Are you there?
Yes. Are you having a good time?
Amber! Hey, Happy New Year's.
Happy New Year.
I wanted to call you.
Thank you.
Amber, are you there?
I'm here.
Amber,
I wish you could hear me.
I'm on the, I think that you're there. I'm near the Eiffel Tower. New Year's celebration is unreal. The crowd is huge.
The crowd's huge?
Amber,
Yes, I'm here.
Amber, if you're there, I can't hear you right now, but I'll call you on your New Year's.
Okay. I'll hear from you then.
Amber, miss you. I'll see you soon.
Okay. I hope...
Dun dun dun. This was like a huge break in the case. So like everyone was like, holy crap.
Yeah.
So like yeah, it was like this was like what everyone was just waiting for. The police were like, oh my god, yes.
Mhm. Yeah, it really worked into the police's theory of what they think happened because if Scott has a mistress and he's having this affair, like this is where, and I know like a lot of times like affairs will come up and people are like, well, that doesn't make somebody a murderer just because they're having an affair, but it's really important because it gives motive, right? So one thing when you're trying to prosecute a case or you're trying to prove or convince people of a story, you have to have a motive. There has to be, someone has to have the means to do it, the opportunity and the motive. So this really could provide some type of a motive that the police are really going to run with. And so it obviously a huge break in the case. So according to Amber Frey, during a press conference on January 24th, 2003, so this is exactly a month after Laci goes missing, they do this press conference. And this is the first time Amber speaks publicly and first time kind of the news breaks about this affair. So she claims that she met Scott on November 20th, 2002. So it's not even like they were together for that long. It was literally like a month before Laci went missing. So it's not like he was having an affair for like 2 years or something. And so it's very early on in their relationship. But she says that Scott told her that he wasn't married. And the police knew of this mistress because she actually goes to the police department on December 30th. And she spoke with them about the nature of her relationship with Scott. And this is where she revealed that they were in a romantic relationship at the time Laci disappeared. And while she is ruled out as a suspect in Laci's disappearance, this revelation, of course, did cast a lot more doubt on Scott.
So this, like, of course, Scott's gonna say, like, he's not married. Like, most people who have affairs are gonna say they're not married. So I don't even know why that's, like why that would be such a suspicious thing. Like, I know because he was married, but a lot of people who have affairs say they're not married.
Well, I think she was saying that because it's like, she was trying to say, like, it's not like I knew he was married and, like, I don't know, maybe people thought, like, they were in on it together or something. Like, if she knew that he had this wife.
Oh, I guess, maybe.
So maybe she was saying, like, I wasn't a bad person. Like, I thought I was just...
Yeah, I think it was for her defense. Yeah, being
okay.
He said he wasn't married. That's why I was with him, kind of thing.
Yeah, because obviously people are going to probably pick her apart too, being like, she's the other woman. Like, she's like breaking up this perfect family. So I guess she had to swoop in there and say, like...
Okay, I guess that makes sense. Like, I never thought about it that way, but yeah.
Amber was a single mother who was set up with Scott through a mutual friend. And she claims that during their entire relationship, she had no idea that he had a very pregnant wife back at home. Amber wasn't even the first mistress that Scott apparently had during the course of their relationship, because apparently there was another woman who came forward during the investigation to say that she was in a romantic relationship with Scott during the period of time when Scott and Laci were dating back in college. There's a pattern here, if you believe this other woman who came forward. So allegedly, the friend who did set up Scott and Amber initially, he, I think, was a co-worker of Scott's and a friend of Amber's, so that was the connection. And he set them up at first, but he actually goes on to find out that Scott was married and that this is the Scott Peterson whose wife has gone missing. And he gives him the ultimatum, which is to tell Amber about the fact that he's married, or this friend's going to go and tell Amber himself. So this kind of forced Scott to have to tell her because she's going to find out either way. And so he thought it was better coming from him than this friend. So Amber says that when Scott told her the news, he becomes very emotional and he explains that he had been married, but that the upcoming holidays would be his first Christmas without her. So I'm going to play a little bit of that call because she also recorded this call of when he tells her that he's married. I believe, or maybe she already knew at this point. It's kind of hard that the timeline, maybe I don't really know the timeline because she's recording this call, so maybe this is after.
Yeah, she knew that all these recordings, like, she had already known, but she didn't tell him she knew. Like, she pretended she didn't know still, and it was like he didn't know she knew. Kind of thing.
So he didn't know that she knew, and he's, coming to her with this confession, not knowing that she already knew, and that not knowing that she's recording this call. But yeah, I'm going to play a little bit of that recording of when he tells her the news. That isn't news to her, but.
Okay.
I'm so sorry that this has happened, and I'm so sorry I'm going to hurt you in this way. I don't want to do this over the phone. I want to tell you this. I want to be there in person to tell you this. But I'm sure that's why Saki called you.
What?
I'm sure it's why Saki called you.
Why would Saki? What are you talking about?
It's the worst thing. Sorry, Amber. I'll just tell you.
Okay.
You haven't been watching the news, obviously.
No.
I have not been traveling during the last couple weeks. I've lied to you that I've been traveling.
Okay.
The girl I'm married to, her name is Laci.
Mm-hmm.
She disappeared just before Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
For the past 2 weeks, I've been in Modesto with her family and mine, searching for her.
Okay.
She just disappeared, and no one knows
Okay, now,
where she's been.
Scott?
And I can't tell you more because I need you to be protected from the media and Ayana. Okay, they are amazing.
Scott,
Yeah.
are you listening?
I am.
You came to me earlier in December and told me that you had lost your wife. What was that about?
She's alive.
What?
She's alive.
Where? She's alive? Where?
In Modesto. Now, I know, this is the hardest. I wanted to tell you first. You need to protect yourself from the media.
Okay.
Okay, if you've been watching the news at all, or you haven't, the media has been telling everyone that I had something to do with her disappearance. So the past 2 weeks I've been hunted by the media. And I don't want you to be involved in this to protect yourself. It's to protect all of us.
To protect all of who?
Everyone involved.
So where is she?
That's what we are trying to find out. It's a nationwide search. It's a $500,000 reward for information leading to her safe return.
Okay, so again, you never answered my question. Why did you tell me it would be the first holidays without her?
I can't. Trudy, I can't explain any more now.
When?
I'm so sorry. You should be so angry at me, and I hope you are.
Yeah, isn't that what you told me before? Oh, I wish, it'd be so much easier if you just hate me and not want to talk to me. And of course, the person I am, of course I'm going to say, you told me you lost your wife. You sat there in front of me and cried and broke down. I sat there and held your hand, Scott, and comforted you. And you were lying to me. Again, you're lying to me about lying.
I lied to you about traveling, yeah.
That's among everything else. That's just an added.
I want to explain to you so badly, but I can't now. And I hope, and I can never ask you to trust me or to even listen
There's
to
no
me
way
again.
I possibly can.
I know it. I can never ask you to do that to me. And I just hope that sometime in the future you will let me tell you the whole story. And I cannot ask you to do that.
That makes a lot more sense to me now, Scott.
What's
Of
that?
course you couldn't tell me the story about your wife because it hadn't happened yet. And you were hoping to resolve in January that it'd be resolved and you'd have a story to tell me.
Do you think I had something to do with her disappearance? Ever do you believe that?
Well, let's see. How can I believe that? How can I believe that? How could I believe anything for...
I am not evil like that.
I would hope not.
So Amber says that she didn't pry about the details of his wife's death. So she assumed, like, when he's saying that she had died, that because she's interviewed in 2020 and they talked to her and she's saying how he had mentioned that his wife had died, but she didn't pry. She was thinking maybe she had died from cancer, or like maybe she had an accident or something. Not that she was murdered, but that just she had died. It was Amber's friend that informed her that her boyfriend Scott was actually on the news about the disappearance of his wife, and this is what causes Amber to contact the police initially to inform them about her relationship with Scott. So that's on December 30th when she goes there. And so then the police give her a tape recorder and ask her to tape all of her phone calls and interactions from that point forward. So that's when she records the New Year's call from Scott when he's reportedly supposed to be in Paris. And also when she records that call that we just played as well. And in reality, like, he's attending the candlelight vigil, or he's supposed to be attending the candlelight vigil for his pregnant wife who's been missing, not in Paris at all. So that's kind of how that happened. And so I guess she had thought he had been married before, because she says that his wife had died from maybe cancer, an accident, and that he was starting to move on with her. So she thought that he had been married before, not that he was currently married. So I think that's how that works out. And she didn't pry because she probably thought it was an emotional thing for him to talk about. So she just took him at his word that he wasn't married. But then, of course, like I said, she finds out from this friend, and she finds out, and then she records this call and all that stuff. So it comes out to the media in January that she is his mistress, and that this is kind of, she tells them the timeline of their relationship from November on. So that's kind of how that goes out. Of course, that's breaking news, like we said.
Yeah, and so obviously Scott was hiding this affair from everyone. And so to me, it now seems obvious why he didn't want his face out there in the news. Like I had said before, like I wasn't going to say it then, but I think that's why one of the reasons why he didn't want to be in the media so much was because he didn't want Amber or anyone she knew to realize that he was connected to this case. Of course, he probably didn't realize how huge this was going to be and that it was inevitable that everyone was going to know who he was. But at the time, he was probably thinking like, oh, I just don't want my face to be on the news and my pictures to be up everywhere because I don't want Amber to find out. That's kind of what I think anyway. He finally did confess to her, like we said. I guess it was because, like, one of the reasons it kind of seemed like was because she told him that a friend had left a message on her machine saying that she was scared for her and she was wondering if Amber was okay. And so this is all recorded, and so Amber's asking Scott, why would she leave a message on my machine like that? Of course, Amber knows this whole time what's going on. But then this is when Scott said he's going to come clean about his missing wife. And also Amber asks him about that statement that he had said earlier regarding this being the first Christmas without her. And Amber states that Scott had said this on December 9th, and this was weeks before Laci was even missing. So she's asking him, why would you say that back then, before all of this went down? And Scott says, quote, "There are different kinds of loss, Amber," end quote. And so it wasn't really until Laci's family learned about Amber that they turned on Scott. And once I had found out, Laci's mom, even said, like, why did he have to kill her? So it was kind of this revelation that he was having an affair, where Scott's family was finally like, oh my God, he actually did do this. That's what they thought. And so the public hated Scott. The police were convinced that he had killed Laci. And now, from this point forward, Laci's family didn't trust him, and they were no longer on his side either. When Scott was explaining why he had kept this affair from everyone for so long into the investigation, he brings up the Chandra Levy case. So I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Chandra Levy was an intern, and she had worked at the Federal Bureau of Prisons when she went missing. And Scott compares his situation to this case because he says that when it came out in the media that Chandra was having an affair with Congressman Kerry Condit, that's when the search for Chandra stopped, and everyone could only focus on this scandal that, this intern was having an affair with this congressman. And that's the only thing that the media cared about. And so he didn't want his affair to get out into the public for fear that the search for Laci would get sidetracked. And actually, this is kind of exactly what happened, because as soon as the public learned about Amber, they shut down the volunteer center that everyone was kind of congregating at, where all the volunteers got together. That was shut down. Everyone felt betrayed by Scott's actions. And so they're kind of like, oh, you had an affair. Well, screw you. We're not helping find your wife anymore. But it's like, why turn your back on Laci just because Scott had an affair? So that is kind of like a crazy thing that happened. And, Scott called it, was completely right.
Yeah, I find that crazy too. Like, why shut down the volunteer? Like, at this point in time, like, it's just shortly after she disappeared, there's been no body that's been found. Like, she's still very much a missing person. And also, an affair doesn't necessarily mean, it means he's a liar and a scumbag. That doesn't mean he murdered her. So it's just weird that they would, like, shut down all messages. Like, don't they still care to find her? Even if they think Scott did it, it's like they still haven't found her body. So why not keep looking?
Well, yeah, I know. And, like, finding Laci, it seems like they're turning their back on Laci just because now they really hate Scott. They have a reason to actually hate him. So it's like, screw everybody, basically. I don't get it.
Yeah, when I read that about them shutting down their vault, I was like, that didn't make any sense to me. I'm like, there's no point in that. Like, she hasn't been found. Like, you still need to keep looking. Just because you think Scott did it still doesn't mean, like, there's still no body, so you can't really know the outcome until you have that body. So it's like,
well, yeah, and it's like everybody hates Scott, so they're not going to help him find Laci, but it's like Laci needs your help regardless of, what Scott did, right? Scott had an affair, but Laci is still missing. So, yeah, it's kind of crazy, the rationale behind that.
Like, yeah, like, that should motivate you even more to find her, to, like, get justice for her. If you think Scott did it and you think he's a scumbag, it's like, well, no, we're going to go and find her body and then bring him to justice quicker. Like, to me, that seems a logical reaction to that.
it just goes to show how, like we've said before, how tunnel vision the police were, because they were so adamant that it was Scott, and like this affair thing, it just kind of like made it even bigger for them that, like, yes, Scott did this, but yet there's still a person who needs to be found, and you're not doing your job by stopping the volunteers searching.
Yeah, I don't think it was the police that shut down the volunteer center. I think it was just like the volunteers were kind of like, well, we're done with this. And yeah, and like we said, just because he had an affair, yes, that's a scumbag thing to do. His wife was 8 months pregnant and he's cheating on her. That doesn't mean he killed her either, right? Those two things, like, don't equal each other. So whether you like Scott or not in the situation, it doesn't mean he did it. And that doesn't mean the search has to stop, which is kind of what happened. But then months later, another big thing happened in this case, and it was April 13th, 2003. The remains of a male fetus was found on the shoreline of San Francisco Bay, and then the following day, a torso is found in the San Francisco Bay. This is a place where the police had been extensively searching for Laci's body, and this is where these remains happened to wash up. And so at this point, they don't know who it is, but, everyone has this feeling that, oh my God, this is them. They've been found. They're dead in the bay where Scott had went the last day Laci had been seen alive. So
yeah, so I want to go back. We're going to get more into, obviously, the discovery of the bodies and much more detail about that in the next part. But before we do that, I want to go back and just ask you guys, like, what are your thoughts on the whole, Katie kind of already said it, but what are you guys' thoughts of the whole Amber Frey situation? Like, obviously, him having an affair doesn't make him a murderer. It makes him a bad person, but doesn't make him a murderer. So what are you guys' thoughts of, like, that revelation of that? And I guess, like, what I said earlier about, like, it doesn't really make him a murderer, but it does really give the police that ammo to put that motive, right? Because that's really going to help the prosecution in a trial if you have this, as you can say, as the motive. And also, what do you think of, like, that stuff that he said to Amber about, this is my last Christmas without her? And then she questions him, like, why would you say that? And then his wife turns up missing, like, a couple weeks after he says that. So that's kind of sketchy. Like, what do you think of all that?
I think the statement he made about his wife, like his Christmas without his wife, is kind of weird because she wasn't missing at that time. So that's a little bit sketchy for him to say that. Like, why would he even say that? But to go back to the Amber Frey thing, like, their affair was, like, what, a month long? Not even? So, like, to me, like, that wouldn't really be a motive for me to go and kill my pregnant wife. I could see if the affair was, like, 2 or 3 years, like, hidden for that long. But for, like, a month, to me, I don't think it has anything to do with Laci's disappearance and her murder.
For me, even before I heard Scott say, well, there's different kinds of loss, when he was trying to explain himself about why he said that this would be his first Christmas without Laci, to me, like, my first thought was, oh, okay, maybe he actually is going to try and end his relationship with Laci. He's not actually planning on spending Christmas with her. And that's what he told her at that time, because he wanted, to kind of get out of this relationship. Why he would choose Christmas to break up with her, I don't know. But that is a possibility as well. Like, he's planning on leaving her and they're not going to spend Christmas together. So that could have been what happened there. That's kind of where my mind went at first. But yeah, the whole Amber Frey thing, yeah, it's definitely shitty that he did that. It's unfortunate that everybody latched onto this to say, well, look how much he's lying. He's a liar. He hid this. He was cheating on his wife. He was lying to her, lying to everybody. So, he's not telling the truth about anything now. And so I think it is a really unfortunate thing to have happened in this case, for Scott, if you're on his side about this. But at least it's only a month long, like Steph said. So I don't know how, like, serious he was into it, if he was going to leave his wife for her. But yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, and I think, while obviously I don't think the Amber Frey thing, I mean, it's, like I've been saying, it's not evidence of murder. It's definitely not anything of that nature. I don't think it's necessarily relevant to the case, only in the fact that it's only relevant in the fact that it's going to give the prosecution or the police that motive that they're looking for. And yes, you can say it only was a month long. Like, are you really going to kill your wife over someone you met for a month or known for a month? But I mean, the police didn't really need much to go on before, and they still were going to pin it on him anyway. So the fact that even if it was only a month long, like, they're still going to take that and run with it, because to them, this is, like, the critical piece that they need to prove motive or to convince at least the public.
Yeah, like, they were going to run with the narrative that Scott was guilty with or without Amber. And then the fact that Amber came along, they're like, oh, yes, this is perfect. Like, I remember in that documentary, one of the detectives was saying, like, yeah, they were just hoping for someone like Amber to come forward. And then when she did, they were actually like, oh my God, yes, this made our case.
Amber did the right thing, of course, by coming forward, because it's important to know that in the investigation. I mean, in a way, even if I don't think it's relevant to the murder, but by doing that, she really fed into this narrative that the police were going with, which obviously she doesn't know that, and it's not her fault. But when the police are sketch, everything it's just, it never goes well.
Yeah, and also I think just the Amber Frey thing is, like, gotta put the final nail in Scott's coffin, because they were coming for him anyway. But then this Amber Frey thing, they were like, yep, this is definitely it, and there was, like, no turning back. I feel like people that maybe were on the edge, maybe, oh, I don't know if Scott did it. As soon as they heard about Amber, they're like, oh, yep, this is why he did it, and he definitely did it. So, yeah, just not a good look.
Yeah, and I think, like, there's nothing that the public doesn't like a person who has an affair. So, I mean, there's levels. I mean, obviously having an affair isn't a crime, but it's like there are levels to being a shitty person. Obviously, murder is way up there. It's like having an affair doesn't equate one to the other. So that even to me is not enough of a thing of, like, okay, you did it just because of that. I mean, it proves that you can lie, or proves that you can have the ability to do that, but it doesn't really prove much else that's relevant to the case, I feel. But obviously it was enough too for this family to turn on him too, because they said this was the tipping point for them where they're like, okay, Scott's are the person who did it because of this. So
I kind of feel like maybe they didn't want to believe it at first, but then as things kept coming out, they're like, oh, maybe, but I'm still not sure. And then as soon as the Amber Frey thing came out, that was a tipping point for them. And they were like, yep, this is it. He definitely did do it because of her, basically.
yeah, and also like one last thing too about that is, even if, you know, the family still believes that Scott's guilty, and they full-heartedly believe that he killed her, you can't really obviously blame them because, and I think even back then too, like in 2002, 2003, it's like 20 years ago, I think even more, I think it's more so in like the most recent decade where it's like people are coming to realize more and more how shady the cops are and how much corruption is there, even if people may have known it then, but I think you're more prone to believing the police. You know, if the police are coming to you and the investigators are telling you this is the evidence they have and that's the narrative they're pushing, like the average person isn't going to push back against that if that's what they're being given. I think now in like the current climate and all that's come out and all that we know about how crooked the cops are due to like true crime docs and stuff and all the cases we've covered, it's much more of an uncertain, like I wouldn't trust necessarily the police and what they're telling me. But back then, you're probably more likely to do that. And even if it's your own family, I mean, you want to believe that the police are doing the right thing. And I guess to cope with it yourself, you want to believe that they're going after the right person. So you can't really even blame the family for their thinking that Scott did it either, right? Or I can't anyway.
No, definitely. And kind of like I mentioned before, when the police were looking in San Francisco Bay for her body, Laci's family still wasn't convinced that she was dead. They still had this hope, of course, that she was out there. So they weren't following the police's lead every single step of the way. That I think finally, like, everything just collapsed and they were like, yeah, the police had it right the whole time. And they just kind of like succumbed to everything. So it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't understand why the family just completely did a 360 on Scott. Like just because of the affair, like that doesn't, to me. I mean, because like I feel like he's not guilty. So to me, for the family just to like turn on him like that is just so sad because they were like, in his corner this whole time, and then that one little thing, but like that affair just kind of like, I don't know.
I think it was like what AJ said. It was kind of like they didn't have a motive. It was like there's no reason for him to do this. They had a loving relationship. He loved his wife. But then that was the motive. It's because he wanted out and he had somebody new. And so that was kind of like, it was kind of making sense to everybody now, almost.
Yeah, I guess. I could see that. That kind of makes sense. But I don't know. I just kind of feel bad for Scott because like now that like this thing is out there and like everybody that was supporting him is just like completely gone the other way.
Yeah, so definitely a lot that's going on. Even this affair gets revealed to the public. Like this is only, a month after she went missing. So we're still very early on in this investigation. And then of course Katie said that in April they do find the body of the male fetus on the shoreline and then the torso found in the San Francisco Bay. And that's in April. And that's where we're going to leave it for this episode. And we're going to pick up with the discovery of the bodies and what that evidence may or may not show us, and go deeper into the trial and all of the events leading up to that and all of that. So that's where we're going to start part 3. So thank you so much for listening to us this far in the Laci Peterson murder case deep dive. We hope you have been enjoying our discussion of it and are following this story as we go along here. And thank you so much for listening. And you can follow us on all the social medias. So on Instagram at Crime Family Podcast, on X at Crime Family Pod 1, Facebook at Crime Family Podcast. We're also on YouTube. You can follow us, subscribe to us on there, and watch all of our episodes or listen to all of our episodes on YouTube as well. You can get some merch for the show. The link to that is in our show notes. You can become a patron on our Patreon. If you become a patron, you can get early access to our episodes. We've released them early to our paid patrons, so you can listen to the episodes before anyone else. Completely ad-free as well, and you can get some bonus episodes that we're going to be releasing periodically throughout the season. So lots of perks that come with being a patron. So definitely join us on Patreon. The link to that is in the show notes as well. So thank you so much. We'll see you next week for part 3 of the Laci Peterson murder case. We hope you'll join us to continue our discussion about this crazy case. So thanks so much. Until next time, see ya.
Bye.
Bye.